This will be our introductory lecture into kidney physiology. I want to begin by breaking it down into its functional unit. The functional unit, or the smallest unit which we can use to explain how the organ functions as a whole, is called the nephron. I have a very simplified diagram of what a nephron looks like here. We're going to divide the nephron into two major components. The first is the vascular component. We begin with the afferent arteriole, which brings blood to the nephron. The afferent arteriole feeds into a collection of capillaries called the glomerulus, and then blood leaves the glomerulus through another arteriole called the efferent arteriole. The efferent arteriole subsequently gives rise to capillaries that surround the tubular portion of the nephron. For now, we'll refer to these generally as the peritubular capillaries. Ultimately, this blood returns to the venous circulation. If we remove the vascular component, what we see here in yellow are the tubular components. The glomerulus is surrounded by Bowman's capsule, with Bowman's space being the space inside the capsule where the filtered fluid initially enters. The filtrate in Bowman's space then enters the proximal tubule. What I have drawn here is a very short, straight segment. In reality, the proximal tubule is long and convoluted, but for simplicity, I'll represent this as a small, straight segment. The proximal tubule then leads to the loop of Henle. We have a descending limb and an ascending limb. Of note, in the ascending limb, there's an important component which we refer to as the thick portion of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. This then leads to the distal tubule, and the distal tubule ultimately drains into a collecting duct. As you'll notice, one collecting duct can receive tubular fluid from multiple nephrons. Now, there are several processes we need to understand with regard to how the nephron functions. The first is known as filtration. Filtration is the movement of fluid and small solutes from the glomerular capillaries across the filtration barrier into Bowman's space. Some of those filtered substances are subsequently moved from the tubular fluid back toward the blood. We call that reabsorption. Other substances can be moved in the opposite direction, from the blood, interstitial fluid, or tubular cells into the tubular lumen. This is secretion. Let's begin with filtration and take a closer look at the glomerular capillaries. This is where filtration occurs. One thing that we immediately notice about the glomerular capillaries is that the endothelium is highly fenestrated. In other words, the endothelial lining contains openings that allow water and small solutes to move out of the capillary relatively easily. Beneath the endothelial cells is the glomerular basement membrane. This also contributes to the filtration barrier. Finally, on the outside of the capillary, we have specialized epithelial cells called podocytes. Podocytes have interdigitating foot processes, and between these processes are filtration slits. Together, the fenestrated endothelium, glomerular basement membrane, and podocyte slit diaphragms form the glomerular filtration barrier. One of the remarkable features of this barrier is its selectivity. Water and many small dissolved substances cross readily, whereas blood cells and most large proteins are strongly restricted. Molecular size is particularly important in determining whether substances can cross the barrier. The basement membrane has an electric charge, and this can also influence the filtration of some larger negatively charged proteins such as albumin. As a result, fluid entering Bowman's space is an ultrafiltrate of plasma. It resembles plasma water with respect to many small dissolved substances, but normally contains essentially no blood cells and also essentially no to little protein. Now, what actually causes filtration to occur? Why does fluid move out of the glomerular capillary across the filtration barrier and into Bowman's space? The forces involved with this are Starling forces. These are similar to the hydrostatic and oncotic forces that we've already covered in systemic capillary beds. First, we have glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure. This is the pressure of the blood within the glomerular capillary, and it's the major force favoring filtration. Opposing filtration, we have glomerular capillary oncotic pressure. This is produced primarily by plasma proteins that remain within the glomerular capillary. Because those proteins are largely retained while fluid is being filtered out, their concentration increases as blood moves through the glomerulus. As a result, glomerular capillary oncotic pressure increases along the length of the capillary. We also have Bowman space hydrostatic pressure. Bowman space is a defined fluid-filled compartment. The fluid already present there exerts pressure back toward the glomerular capillary, so Bowman space hydrostatic pressure opposes filtration. Finally, we could consider Bowman space oncotic pressure. In the healthy kidney, very little protein is present. So this is a pressure which is essentially zero and contributes very little under normal circumstances. If we combine the forces favoring filtration and subtract the forces that oppose filtration, we obtain the net filtration pressure. Now let's look at these forces graphically. First, glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure is relatively high and remains high as blood travels through the glomerular capillary. This is an important feature of this particular capillary bed. Bowman's oncotic pressure is essentially zero under normal circumstances. Glomerular capillary oncotic pressure opposes filtration and increases as we move along the capillary because fluid is being filtered while the protein remain behind. Bowman space hydrostatic pressure also opposes filtration. When we combine these forces, the net filtration pressure remains positive along the entire glomerular capillary. Let's compare this with systemic capillaries. In the typical systemic capillary, hydrostatic pressure falls substantially as blood travels through the capillary, so the tendency toward filtration decreases. The key contrast in the glomerulus is that glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure starts very high and remains high along the entire length of the capillary. At the same time, glomerular capillary oncotic pressure and Bowman space hydrostatic pressure oppose filtration, but the net balance favors filtration along its entire length. This high and sustained filtration is one reason the kidneys are able to filter such a large volume of fluid. The volume of filtrate formed by the kidney per unit time is called the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. As shown in this diagram, the kidney receives a remarkably large percentage of cardiac output. Even though it's a small organ, it receives approximately 20% of our total cardiac output. As this blood flows through the afferent arteriole and into the glomerulus, we end up filtering only about 20% of that plasma into the tubular lumen. We call this proportion of filtrate that forms the filtration fraction. Even though our filtration fraction is only 20%, because the plasma is flowing through the kidney continuously, this filtration process occurs over and over throughout the day, producing a very large daily volume of glomerular filtrate. It's estimated that we filter approximately 180 liters a day. The net filtration pressure is the driving force for fluid across the filtration barrier. As we previously discussed, this is the net of the Starling forces. The amount of filtration also depends on properties of the filtration barrier itself, particularly its permeability, as well as the surface area available for filtration. We combine those two properties into what is called the filtration coefficient. Conceptually, glomerular filtration rate depends on the net filtration pressure multiplied by the filtration coefficient. The important concept at this point is that filtration depends on both the pressure driving fluid across the glomerular filtration barrier and on the ability of that barrier to allow filtration. And finally, remember that glomerular filtration rate tells us how much fluid initially enters the renal tubules. It does not by itself tell us how much urine will ultimately be produced. Final urine volume depends heavily on what happens after filtration, particularly how much water and solute are subsequently reabsorbed along the nephron. That distinction will become increasingly important as we move into tubular reabsorption and later regulation of water balance.